Okay, let's get started. So thank you for coming today. This is one of a series in this year of our Allen Institute for Brain Science Distinguished Scientist Lectures. And I'm very, very pleased today to announce that Dr. Karen Rommelfanger is joining us. She's from Emory. She is a neuroethicist, and she has a number of different appointments. I'll name a couple of them, but there are many. She's with the Department of Neurology, Psychology, and Behavioral Sciences as a professor at Emory. She's also the director of the Neuroethics Program and Center of Ethics at Emory. She's a senior editor at the American Journal of Bioethics, Neuroscience, and also an editor of the Neuroethics blog, which is a cool blog. She's also with the Brain Initiative Neuroethics Working Group, actually, and has written a number of pieces, some particularly notable ones in the last year, describing sort of an overall view of how neuroethics are impacting and being thought about with the Brain Initiative. So today she joins us. She actually had some pre-homework that some of you might have done that actually parsed some of the questions and attitudes about neuroethics here at the Allen Institute. So she's going to be talking a little bit about that and focusing on her title here. It's No Longer Unthinkable, Neuroethics Questions for the 21st Century Neuroscientist. So please help me welcoming Karen to the Allen Institute.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for having me here today. It's really, truly my pleasure and honor to be here. And we have a really exciting opportunity to have a discussion today. And throughout the day, I'll be hanging out all day. So if you want to come see me later, Amy will tell you. Oh, or I should just tell you.
I should actually just say that.
Yes.
So, sorry, I forgot to mention that Karen has sort of open time set aside between 2:30 and 3:30. Just open office, essentially, in room 389. If you're interested in talking with her, feel free to stop by then.
Yeah. It's a beautiful room with a beautiful view. We'll have a good conversation. Okay. So I don't really have to tell you this, but I'll start out just to frame that the landscape of neuroscience is changing rapidly every day, and you guys are part of changing that landscape. You are on the frontiers of neuroscience, and the world and the citizens of that world, and maybe even you, wonder what those findings are going to mean for society. What are they going to mean for daily life? What are they going to mean for well-being, illness, aging? And how are we going to manage that on the global landscape? How is it going to change global life? Because we are on the frontiers of science, we also need an equally relevant and robust frontiers of neuroethics to keep pace. And that's what we're going to discuss today. I'm thrilled to be here because you guys are my people, especially those of you who came today. Maybe some of your colleagues are my people too, but they're not here. That's okay. This is the quality group here, right? So I looked a little bit at your website, and your tagline is, the human brain is the most complex piece of organized matter in the known universe, and we're working to uncover those mysteries, right? Our brains are what make us human. They give us rise to our thoughts, actions, movements, and desires, store our memories, and enable us to navigate our world every day. Yet despite decades of research and impressive knowledge gathered about other aspects of the human body, including our entire genetic sequence, the brain remains largely unknown. So you are essentially studying what makes us human. And so there are going to be significant implications to that. So is there anything ethically special about the brain? Is there something ethically special about neuroscience? Well, I think most of you would agree that there is, otherwise you wouldn't be involved in that work. Because the brain seems to be, in our popular imagination, and maybe in reality, the site of the mind, whatever that is, identity, free will, decision-making, personhood, privacy, morality, and the brain is arguably the most self-defining organ in human existence. And if this is true, then there are unique societal implications to brain research, such as thinking, my brain made me do it. If the brain is the site of decision-making and intended actions, how might neuroscience impact how we understand free will or responsibility in the legal setting, for instance? Are the brain and its contents truly private? If we can interpret or predict things like words, images, desires, and decision-making in the brain, do we have particular obligation to protecting brain data and those who consent to participate in research? And neural data might be revealing in ways that other data aren't. If we can better understand the circuitry in health and diseased brains, we might be able to predict risk for developing brain diseases. How will we manage the weight of prediction that predicts not just the disease you have, but in the case of brain disease, who you may become? So the outline for today is to discuss a little bit about what is neuroethics. Then we'll do a little exercise where we'll ask you to stand up and sit down, or if you're someone who is not wanting to stand up or sit down, you can raise your hand or lower it. And we'll have an intro into these neuroethics scenarios, and these were in the survey that we sent out. Then we'll go through 5 neuroethics questions that we think neuroscientists should be engaging in, and we'll be asking how these are globally relevant. And for those of you, actually for all of you, you'll see the survey results that were conducted here at the Allen Institute throughout. So first let me ask you, who here in the room answered the survey, if you're willing to? Great, okay. So many of you answered it and some of you didn't. This is the exact crowd I wanted, so great. Okay, so what is neuroethics? Seems like so I asked you, please rank your familiarity with the term neuroethics, and you could rank it as very familiar, I've heard of it, but not really sure, or I'm not at all familiar. And it seems like we have about half and half that had heard of very, very familiar and not so familiar. And that's about what most of the community is like. And the reason why we have that level of familiarity is because there's growing understanding that neuroethics is a critical part of neuroscience, but also the field itself is only about 15 years old. So there are many definitions of neuroethics, but in brief, I'll give you 2 points about that. And neuroethics is a field that systematically explores how neuroscience and neurotechnologies impact our value systems as a society and as individuals. So as somebody who was once a bench scientist and using a lot of the technologies and methodologies that you use here, I can tell you that when I moved into neuroethics, a lot of people said, isn't this just an exercise of asking unanswerable questions in kind of a haphazard way? Actually, there is a system and a methodology for doing that, and we can talk about that. But the important piece of that is that we do it systematically. And we're studying value systems. And importantly, neuroethics explores value conflicts and tensions that intersect with new neuroscientific discoveries in society. So if there is a yes or no answer already available, or if there's a clear right or wrong, then you don't need me around. Usually I'm around when you're choosing the less bad option, for instance. And neuroethics is very, very different from compliance. So I think years of bad responsible conduct of research training has ruined most of you for ethics, and that maybe not this crowd, you still have a little bit of hope. And that you think of compliance is important, but that's not really what I'm working on. I'm working on trying to evaluate a problem from multiple perspectives to come up with either the least bad option or the more good option. So why is neuroethics important? Neuroethics is now an integral part of frontier neuroscience. Neuroethics serves as a horizon scanning function, anticipating potential roadblocks ahead and working to mitigate those early on or integrate problem solving into those early in the process. And in so doing, we hope to advance and accelerate neuroscience. Neuroethics topics and the importance of them have registered at the highest levels of government. So in the United States, already we have put out, under President Obama, we had President's Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues actually put out 2 volumes discussing the importance of neuroethics and how to manage it. Right now, as Amy mentioned, the BRAIN Initiative has a neuroethics working group for which I serve, and even the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a transnational organization that looks at policy and emerging tech amongst a number of things, has put neuroethics at the forefront of their priorities. And importantly, neurotechnology is the only technology that they've ever felt compelled to write a set of principles for, which they're doing right now. So now we'll move on to our little interactive stand-up, sit-down exercise, and you're welcome to stand up or sit down or raise your hand for these points. And then I'll also share with you the results from the internal survey. And this was something designed in collaboration with the National Informal STEM Education Network and the Copley Foundation, and in collaboration with a Global Neuroethics Summit, which I will tell you a little bit about later. So first, I want to ask where you're from. And what I mean by that is, where do you identify as being the roots of your cultural roots, okay? So I am actually half Chinese. I spent half of my life in Japan and then the US, but I probably self-identify most with Western culture in the United States. So that's where I would say I would reside in North America as far as where I'm from. So where are you from? Please stand up or raise your hand for where you're from. Asia? Okay, it's kind of like blinded here, so I'm trying to see. Great, Asia? Okay, those are my people too. Okay, Africa? Wonderful. Okay, Europe? Oh, lots of people from Europe. Okay, North America? All right, we got a big crowd. Thank you for standing up. South America? Okay, Oceania? Yeah, Antarctica. I have to put it on there, you know. We need to build our neuroscience community in Antarctica, I suppose. Okay. So, good. I really love this because you have a really good crowd. You have a lot of representation. So, what neuroethics question keeps you awake at night? Stand up for the two that really make you think about the most. And I'll read them first and then you can stand up. So, what is a healthy brain? Oh, okay. Well, you can pick your two. Okay, what is a healthy brain? That seems to concern you. Who owns your brain data? Okay. When does an engineered brain have rights? Who's in charge, you or the neurotech? Oh, wow, okay. And in society, who gets to have the neurotech? Okay. We have a social justice-oriented crowd. I shouldn't be surprised. This is the Allen Institute, open science, right? Okay, so in the survey we asked which neuroethics question keeps you up at night, and you can choose two. And these were, when does an engineered brain have rights? Who's in charge, you or the neurotech? What is a healthy brain? Who owns your brain data? Who in society gets neurotech? And greater on this corresponds to which ones you cared about most. And the survey participants said they cared most about what's a healthy brain and who owns your brain data. Let's see if that stays the same throughout this talk. Okay, next question. When your child's school requests permission for her to take a new screening for mental health, stand up for uses of the test you agree with. Anonymous addition to a government data set on mental health. Okay. Findings are only released to you. No record exists after the test. Okay. Anonymous results are used to obtain more funding for mental health programs that will benefit the community. Okay. If issues are revealed in the test, your child is enrolled in supportive programs with substantially reduced fees. Okay. None, I would refuse the test. Oh, I usually get a few of those. Okay, good. Open crowd. So here's the question. And again, here are the greater on this bar is more of you said you agree with that. And so it looks like most of you are supportive for anonymous addition to a data set for a government agency on mental health, and anonymous results are used by schools to obtain more funding for mental health programs that will benefit the community. And you got to mix in between. So this is kind of similar to what you said, except we got a little bit of no, I would refuse the test on the survey. Okay, next scenario. Advanced facial recognition technology is installed in your local grocery store. Sit down when the application feels uncomfortable. Okay, so really I need you all to start standing up. If that's something that's possible for you, otherwise you can just keep your hand raised as well. Okay, great. Remember, sit down when the application feels uncomfortable. When you enter the daily count of return visitors goes up by 1. Okay. Yeah, there's a little bit of social pressure in here too, because you can see each other. But okay, sit down. So sit down when you feel uncomfortable. As you walk by the products you have bought in the past, a text message alerts you to a discount. Oh, you don't like that at all, do you? All right, you don't want discounts? Okay. If you look confused, an employee is sent to your location to ask if you require assistance. Yeah, people want a little bit of help, right? That's okay, okay. The camera assesses you are happy, and a nearby video screen plays fun ads for sweets and fancy food products. Don't like that. Don't want fancy food products, but a few of you are open to it. The camera assesses you are sad, and you get a text message asking if you are okay and would like a suggestion on products to pick up your mood. Okay. Oh, I thought we were going to at least have one standing. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. So, how did you fare compared to the survey? You guys looked around. So it looks like, at what point did you feel uncomfortable? Most people sat down at this point. When you walk by products you have bought in the past, a text message is sent to you. Although I have to say, quite a few of you sat down in this room here. Or that spot there. Great. A new neurotechnology product comes out that gives you a small boost in attention and focus. Stand up for uses you agree with. Stand up for what you agree with. A clinical application where patients can reclaim some function using the device. Okay, most of you are okay with that. Some of you are not okay with that. Okay. City bus drivers are issued the device to help stay attentive during long routes. Stand up if you agree with that. City bus drivers. Okay. Maybe some of you haven't ridden on the buses in Atlanta, where I'm from. Okay. University students studying for finals ask their parents to buy the device to get ahead in their studies. You agree? You agree? Studying? Okay. Actually, a lot of people want this. I want this in Korea and China. Okay. Gamers use the device to maintain their lead in an online competition. You okay with that? Not a lot of gamers? Okay. All right. A person reading a book claims the device helps them focus after a long day at work. You okay with that? Okay. Okay. So, compared to the survey participants, seems like most of you are okay with this clinical application where patients can reclaim some everyday function. And even if you're just personally wanting to read a book after a busy day at the Allen Institute, but not so okay with university students who are studying. Okay, next question. When do you think the public should be involved in neuroscience and tech development? Stand up for those you support. After research discoveries are made. After research discoveries made, okay. Before funding decisions by government agencies. You want the public to be involved before, okay? Before funding decisions by private foundations and companies. You feel the same, okay? During discussions at professional conferences. You want the public at your professional conferences, okay? At early stages of scientist and engineering training programs. Okay? All right, so according to the survey for those who participated, it seemed like most people thought the public should be more involved after research discoveries are made and when there's government funding. Those seem to be the top picks. Okay. Which of these neuroethics topics do you most frequently see in the news? New ways to understand mental health and illness. Lots of you, okay. Data privacy. Lots of data privacy, okay. Neuroenhancement. Okay, first two or more. Neurotech challenges for autonomy. Okay, maybe. Okay. Best or worst uses of neuroscience beyond clinical and laboratory settings. A few or less. Okay. So it seemed like the first two were most. And also, I must say that as we were beta testing this, I could see how this question was a little confusing for some of them. But for those of you who answered, it seems like which topics do you see the most related to neuroethics are mental health diagnosis and data privacy. Okay. Which goals of public engagement on neuroethical topics do you most support? Pushing research and development in the direction of public priorities. Pushing research and development, okay. Increased public funding for research. Okay. Right. Providing scientists a publicly vetted pathway for advancement. Okay, less so. Reducing stigma around conditions and procedures related to the brain. Okay. Involving the public who have valuable, distinct input from researchers. Okay, thank you. So which goals of public engagement in neuroethics do you most support? It looks like for those who participated in the survey, for increased public funding for research and reducing stigma around the conditions and procedures related to the brain. So I think this is the last of the stand up, sit down. Stand for any types of neuroscience public engagement you've participated in. And I don't think that this was on the survey. Structured discussion through a deliberative dialogue or citizen jury. Okay. Interactive exhibits at a museum or in the public space of a research center. Okay, a lot more of you for that. Inspirational art, like an art exhibition or a film. Oh, cool, okay. Expert-driven presentation or a panel discussion in front of public audiences. Okay, good. Patient collaboration, advocacy group meeting, or outreach event. Okay, yeah, what we're finding is the most common is this expert-driven presentation, because that's the easiest to do, actually. Not necessarily the best, but can be. Oh, last one, sorry, blog, website, or other online forum. Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so that gave you the kind of the flavor of questions that we're thinking about within neuroethics, and as a little fun scenario. But now we're gonna go through the 5 neuroethics questions that we have collaboratively developed for neuroscientists, and we want these questions to be globally, culturally nimble, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So, neuroethics needs to be global. As I mentioned, neuroscience is a global affair, right? And one of the things that I'm working on now is working to bring all the existing and emerging large-scale brain research projects around the globe together to talk about neuroethics. And I've been doing this for a couple years. So right now we have 7 existing and emerging large-scale brain projects. You can see a lot of this is gray. So there's a lot of people that we need to pull into our conversation. But we're trying to leverage the fellowship of these organizations first to kind of come up with some best practices and ideas. And along the way, we're trying to also incorporate people from the great outreaches as well. So neuroscience is a national funding priority around the world. And what we've seen from this is, and what we've always seen, but maybe haven't talked about, is that values and culture determine what kinds of neuroscience happen and where that science can happen. And you need to look no further than non-human primate research and the not-so-rapid move out of Western projects and to being the focus of East Asian projects on this map to see a demonstration of that. Gaps in understanding can lead to missed opportunities for collaboration and advancements to future discoveries. And I don't think I have to tell this group that, because this is a group that is keenly aware of the importance of collaboration. And neuroethics now has actually been integrated in informal and formal ways into each one of these brain projects now. So there is now a commitment from all of them at a very high level to be working on neuroethics. And I co-chair something called the Global Neuroethics Group, which, as I mentioned, bring these groups together to have enrich their neuroethics components and see how they can collaboratively work together as they are integrated into the science. But one problem we have is that as we've been thinking about ethics or bioethics largely, we really rely on Western philosophical perspectives to do that, and we always have. Bioethics is really largely informed by white Western philosophers, and that's the bottom line. And if you want to make this globally relevant, we really need to take into account a lot of other philosophical perspectives. One issue is that at the core of bioethics, Western bioethics, is the foundation is protecting the rights of the individual. But this really doesn't make sense for most of the world where identity is thought of more in a collective sense. So how we evaluate problems and think about rights actually is interpreted differently from that lens. And we're trying to figure out how to integrate all of that. Now, importantly, I made this distinction by talking about extremes. But our project is to look at relative differences, not to look at the spectacle of the other, but to allow opportunity to more deeply explore our own cultural traditions in thinking about how to evaluate these problems. So these are 5 neuroethics questions that we came up with neuroscientists. So who's we and how did we come up with these? We are the members of all of those brain projects. So each of those brain projects brought forward or appointed neuroethicists and scientists to work together to come up with a list of questions that they thought were recurrent and relevant across all the brain projects. We did this collaboratively, we did this with an interdisciplinary lens, we had cross-cultural scholars, and importantly, we were rooted in the science. So I think a lot of, one fear with neuroscience is that you can quickly look into the far, far future and move into the domains of science fiction. And that is what we want to stay away from. On the other hand, I have to say, as a neuroscientist moving into neuroethics, large part of my job initially was just telling people, yeah, that's cute, that's never going to happen. Maybe you find yourself in that role as well at dinner parties and things like that, or even at the grocery store, perhaps. But now I have to say, as I've seen more of fringe science and moved along, sometimes I am shocked even at what's possible today that I thought was once in the realm of science fiction. But all that to say is that we were rooted in the science, and what we did is ask each of the brain projects to come up with case studies that were actually real live problems for them right now, and we worked on discussing those. And I'll share some of those with you today. Who do we want to use these questions? We want neuroscientists to use these questions. We want institutions, granting agencies, and society at large to use these questions. We hope they're useful. And how are these different from other neuroethics questions that are asked? These are, for those of you who are familiar with neuroethics, at 48% from the survey, these are familiar, but we're inviting a more expansive, culturally aware approach to addressing them. Now, I want to say something important about these questions. These questions are probably too small for you to read. That's also important. But I will give you more on this as we go through. But this is our first attempt at this because no such questions existed yet. From our work with neuroscientists, we are often asked, can you just give me a checklist of what to do? Remember I told you about bad RCR training. Can you just give me a checklist and I'll just do all those things? Well, we can't give you a checklist of behavior because all the scenarios become so unique. But we can give you a list of questions, and that's what we did. Because this is our first attempt, we're kind of beta testing these. So we came up with these as a group, as I showed you on the map of the areas that were involved in this, but there's a lot of gray areas too. So we don't know how relevant these are, but we anticipate that we're going to be changing these and adapting these, that some of those questions might go away, might be improved, and I actually would love to have your feedback on that, and I am free from 2:30 to 3:30, so if you want to talk about that a little more, we can do that later. And this paper is available on Neuron. It was put out in October 2018. So I asked you what you thought about these questions for those of you who filled out the survey. And the question that you understood best, some of these you really didn't understand. Like the first question seemed to be a little confusing. But it seemed like you most understood this one. What are the ethical standards of biological material and data collection, and how do local standards compare to those of global collaborators? That one seemed to resonate. Which one did you value most? You seem to really value this one, the same one that I just mentioned. And which question did you think the public valued most? You thought this one. In which context might a neuroscientific technology or innovation be used or deployed? So this is uses beyond the bench. So how does one become culturally aware when evaluating these issues? We're looking for actually, in the landscape of cultural competence, we're asking for a pretty low bar. So the trajectory is cultural awareness to cultural sensitivity to cultural competence. Awareness is just being open to that there are other cultural perspectives, knowing that an observation of others offers deeper personal understanding, and that global self-awareness and thinking about yourself as a member of a global community. Those are kind of some basic things. And we're looking to create a framework actually for helping people to look into this, but I won't go into that now. So the first question, and I'll go through the 5 and then we'll be ending. So what is the potential impact of a biological model or neuroscientific account of disease? So we came up with this question largely informed by one of these cases from China, and I'll read that case study to you. So this is about preclinical detection. This is detecting a disease before it actually is one, looking for features that might predict the onset of a disease, but don't characterize the disease, okay? So new tests, cognitive behavioral, neuroimaging, eye tracking tests, are in development as early diagnostic for Alzheimer's disease. As part of their development, a large group of people has been enrolled in a longitudinal study of their effectiveness. The results of the study show that some participants have significantly higher risk for Alzheimer's. However, there is currently no effective therapy for patients with Alzheimer's, even if it is diagnosed before the onset of symptoms. Jing Sheng participated in the study and has emailed the study coordinator to find out her results. Should the study coordinator inform Jing Sheng of her results? Should the study have been designed so that all individual results would not be identifiable? Does Jing Sheng's reasoning for requesting her results matter? For example, she may have a grandmother with Alzheimer's and just be anxious to know her status, and she might want to enroll in a clinical trial for treatment for persons susceptible to Alzheimer's. If she is informed of her results, must all participants be contacted and disclose the results? Is it ethical to conduct a study to diagnose disease early when no effective treatment for the disease exists even? So considerations in this case that are open to cultural interpretation are things like stigma, thinking about identity, one that is conceptualized as being relational, that is a product of a relationship, and familial versus individual consent. So when I asked you about this, or those of you who responded to this, when I asked about your understanding, it seemed that, remember, more or higher on this is more understanding. Let's look at the green bars. So a lot of you seem to actually understand this quite well. There is this, and the relevance to you, most of you said this was kind of relevant, and kind of relevant to the general public as well. And one of the ways that we think about this from a cultural lens, and I should tell you that because 3 of the 7 of our large-scale brain projects are located in East Asia, we often look to East Asian philosophical traditions to explore these. And what we've learned is that from many cultures, the mind, brain, and body are inextricably linked, as typified by even language. Chinese and Japanese concepts of shin, or kokoro, mean mind, heart, spirit, as inseparable features. And the same character is also recognized in Korean as maum. So the centrality of the brain as self has implications for evaluating things like moral status, when does life start, when does it end, responsibility, and ideas for human flourishing. So these are the considerations we're thinking about. The second question, which most of you said were really relevant to you, were what are the ethical standards of data collection and how do local standards compare to those of global collaborators? And this involves actually 2 different parts. So how can human brain data and the privacy of the participants for whom data is acquired be protected in the case of immediate use or even legacy use beyond this? These data are precious, these tissues are precious, we want to use them as much as we can. And also, should special regard be given to brain tissue and its donors due to the origin of the tissue and its past? And I think most of you are familiar with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU, which has caused all of your internet sites to have a new pop-up that says, we respect your privacy, blah, blah, and you don't read it and you click it to go on, right? And also, this piece here, this came out with June 23rd. This is a really nice piece about the Allen Institute. And the title is, Would You Donate Part of Your Living Brain to Science? This man did. And it brings up questions about those who are going in for do have diseases now, are willing to donate parts of their brain for science, how should we regard that tissue? And and for most of you, you said, this is your understanding, green is completely understand, blue is somewhat, yellow is not at all. Sounds like most of you really understood this question. It was quite relevant to you, and you thought it was relevant to the general public as well. And considerations here that we feel are open to cultural interpretation are notions of privacy, how to share data, individual versus group harms, and networked harms. So when we conceptualize ownership, how one conceptualizes ownership, privacy, and integrity actually differs across cultures. In the Confucian cultural context, for example, family is the guiding metaphor for interpersonal relationships. To address a collection of people in Chinese is to say dajia, which is literally translated into big family. The relational aspects impacts also definitions of privacy. So privacy in the Chinese word for privacy, and even the legacy of thinking of privacy in Japan originally was associated with shameful secrets. So you wouldn't even need privacy unless it was something that was shameful. That's not to say that there aren't different notions of that now, but just to know that when you're looking at the cultural legacy of a country, this is something that is present. Okay, the third question is, what is the moral significance of neural systems that are under development in neuroscience research laboratories? So what's the requisite or even minimum features of engineered neural circuitry that are required to generate a concern? And are ethical standards of research conduct adequate and appropriate for evolving methodologies? So we already have rapid development in non-human primate research. I was just at the Chinese Academy of Sciences last week, still a little bit jet-lagged, where they have a large cloning facility for monkeys. And they also are home to this study where they had recently looked at development in the brain and inserted genes that resulted in enhanced cognitive ability. And while I said up front that a lot of non-human primate research is the foci now of a lot of East Asian projects, I have to say that they're being very mindful and curious about what kinds of ethical implications are related to this. For example, there was even questions about how to treat those animals now, and if there's some kind of different regard that they need to be given. Another interesting piece about this is that these were cloned monkeys, Zhongzhong and Huahua, and Zhonghua is China. And I don't think if we cloned monkeys in the United States, for instance, we would call them America. So this is kind of another interesting piece to that. Of course, we have this development of organoids, brain organoids, where we're questioning those abilities and whether the limits of research that we can do on that. And probably most of you heard, and this is something that we were advising on in the Brain Initiative long before it was published, about the study where there was restoration of brain circulation and cellular function hours after postmortem with pig brains. And what might that mean for future research? So considerations here involve notions of personhood, what counts as conscious, how to collaborate across transnational values and regulatory networks. And for you here, this point, this question was deemed by you as not really relevant, not as relevant to you guys as far as ranking it against the other questions, and something you thought was a little less relevant to the public. And when thinking about this from a cultural lens, when you're determining something like moral status or how you regard tissue, models and engineered neural circuitry can blur lines between humans and non-humans. In fact, that's what you guys look at here, what is human. And as they become closer approximation of human brains, we also come into the conundrum of if we really need human brains to be something closer to human brains to be able to study human brains, and we can't usually use human brains because it's unethical, then how should we evaluate models as they get closer and closer to human brains? So in addition to that, some other interesting developments are that several brain projects aim to create socially assistive robots, and we also see divergent ways in which those robots are being developed and how much they can resemble humans. So in Western communities, there are a lot of people who say you cannot create robots that look like humans until they actually are humans, so they have to kind of look genderless and actually have to look kind of cartoon-like But of course, in Korea and Japan, we've developed some of the most realistic looking assistive robots we have. The fourth question, how could brain interventions impact or reduce autonomy? This was one of the questions that was deemed a little less relevant to the public, and maybe because I'm kind of curious as to why. I have some ideas though. And here I'll read one of the cases. So this was one of the cases, I think, put forward by Australia. This is about deep brain stimulation. How many people know what deep brain stimulation is? Yeah. So this is a picture of one type of deep brain stimulation where a hole is drilled into the skull, electrode is placed in deep brain structures and attached to a wire, and then a battery that sends electrical impulses to that part of the brain. And it's used to treat motor disorders and is now increasingly being explored for psychiatric disorders. So in this case study, Jerry is a 65-year-old man who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2008. He initially responded well to the medication, but his motor symptoms gradually worsened despite large increases in drug doses that caused significant side effects. His neurologist suggested that he undergo deep brain stimulation to control his freezing and tremor. Surgery in 2012 significantly reduced his motor symptoms, and Jerry was able to return to all the activities that he did before the onset of Parkinson's, such as bowling with friends, bushwalking, it's Australian, with his wife, Shirley, and socializing at parties. Jerry was energetic and highly sociable. Shirley had never known Jerry to be so gregarious and full of life. Their sex life was reignited too after being largely celibate prior to the surgery, although Shirley found his demands for sex were sometimes a bit too much. In 2013, Jerry was charged with having sexual intercourse with a minor. At trial, it became apparent that he had developed hypersexuality and he'd used prostitutes on over 500 occasions in the 18 months after surgery, including male and transgender prostitutes. He claims that he had not previously engaged in homosexual behavior. His neurologist believed that the deep brain stimulation had caused his hypersexuality, arguing that around 1 in 5 people who receive this treatment develop a compulsive behavior. His stimulator was turned off, his compulsive sexual behavior ceased, but his severe motor symptoms returned, worse than before. He became bedridden and needed to be cared for by his daughter because his wife left him. So some questions that were asked about this were these behaviors an authentic expression of who Jerry was? Was he responsible for them? Did the stimulation create new desires, thereby altering his sense of self, or did it simply unmask a latent tendency? And also, should Jerry be held responsible for the criminal sexual acts? Should Jerry have noticed increased sexual desires and sought help? Is he responsible for not getting help? So considerations here that are open to cultural interpretation include notions of responsibility and accountability as it relates to the brain. So when we asked you guys about this, you said that you understood it and that it was relevant, but this was one of the ones you ranked as yellow is not at all, as not so relevant. And one of the things we thought about with this case with a cross-cultural lens was attributing agency and responsibility. Autonomy may be considered a collective or individual capacity. Notions of responsibility have been tied to the brain, and neuroscience has been increasingly used in US courts. However, preliminary study in Taiwan, for instance, suggested that brain diseases and abnormalities did not impact views of responsibility for criminal acts. This is the final question. In which context beyond the bench might a technology or innovation be used or deployed? And this was the one that you guys said was most relevant to you and you thought was probably most relevant to the public. So the types of questions we consider with this is, which applications might be considered misuse or best uses beyond the laboratory? Does this research raise different and unique equity questions? And if so, have equitable access and benefit of stakeholders been considered? This is a justice-oriented crowd, so I'm not surprised. And considerations that are open to cultural interpretation include uses for enhancement and augmentation, clinical use versus commercial use, abuse and misuse of the technology, such as in the legal system. And I already mentioned that you guys seem to quite understood this. It's really relevant, and you thought it was very relevant to the general public as well. So what is just use of technology as we're thinking about this? on a global stage, cognitive enhancement might be desirable in some contexts, like in warfighters, but might not be in civilian contexts. You guys were okay with perhaps having some stimulation that would increase your awareness and alertness during reading a book after work, after a long day at the Allen Institute, but maybe didn't want your bus driver using it. Varying valuations of risk are related to thinking about foundational features of self and responsibility and priorities of individuals to collective benefit, and how, and this will impact how these technologies are designed and developed and ultimately translated into society. So in closing, I'll say that all of these brain projects have come together, thought about these questions, and have begun preliminary discussions on how they're going to integrate those questions into their research. And this was outlined in an open access issue in Neuron, in one of the first neuroethics special issues in a high impact neuroscience journal. And this was published in February 2019, and you are welcome to just Google that and look for it. And I want to continue being able to talk with you guys, and I want to, maybe some of you I know would talk one-on-one, some of you maybe want to email me what you think about, I hope. I'm happy to talk with you, or maybe some of you just want to come to a few more events to get a sense of what we're doing. So anybody going to Ebro this fall? Okay, I'm probably not going to see you there. So Ebro, if you get some extra money in your professional development budget, come join us at Ebro. On September 24th, we'll have a special event on neuroethics. The Global Neuroethics Summit is a group that I mentioned. I run I co-chair the Global Neuroethics Group of the International Brain Initiative, which is that consortium of 7 large-scale projects. And annually, we have a summit that's by invitation only, and we invite people to join into some of these discussions and plan how we might solve some of these problems. For 2020, anybody planning on going to FENS? Gosh, oh yes, okay. Which conferences do you guys go to? SFN? Okay, I should tell you about that too then. Okay. And then we're collaborating with Cold Spring Harbor, particularly the Cold Spring Harbor group in Asia, where we will be offering education in neuroethics. So if those of you are for those of you going to SFN, come a few days early and join us at the International Neuroethics Society, where you will hear a bunch of all of this stuff, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. So stay in touch. Here's can you even read my email from back there? I have cards. Come talk to me if you want one. Amy mentioned the blog that we have, which is the Neuroethics blog. It's pretty simple to find it, www.theneuroethicsblog.com. And we weekly publish, that's a blog of our society's journal, the American Journal of Bioethics Neuroscience. And if you want to learn more about the Global Neuroethics Group, you can go to theglobalneuroethicssummit.com. And thank you for your time.
So we have some time for questions. If there are a couple of questions, I think there are people on the aisles with mics. Just raise your hand. If not, I had actually a question about some of the questions that you had. So the 5 questions that came up.
Yes.
And I was wondering, obviously the intent is for these to be global in nature, but were there key questions that were emerging when you were looking at those different, essentially groups of people representing different areas of the world that had divergent sort of focuses on what they were really addressing as key questions that didn't seem to resonate on any level across a more global group?
Actually, the issue on privacy seemed to be very, very different. So I actually heard, a couple times in private, have been pulled aside by Chinese colleagues who have said, if you come in here and talk about privacy, you're just going to shut down our conversations. Like every time we go to a Western meeting where people are talking about ethics, they bring up privacy, and that's just something that doesn't matter as much to us. We're not as concerned about that in this context. It's not to say privacy isn't important at all, but in the context of thinking about brain data, any of the issues that we brought up at the scenario of you walking through the store and being offered coupons with facial recognition. I mean, everybody undergoes facial recognition there. I had my face taken a picture, all my information is there now so they can find me. So that privacy was one that was really, really divergent. But another issue that I didn't bring up that came up, and it seems like a significant enough problem that there's probably going to be a consortium of the East Asian projects, the one in Japan and Korea and China, is around human tissue and brain donations. So in the Confucian tradition, and I use this to illustrate the cultural context. I don't think most people would say, I am Confucian. It's just when you have this legacy in your culture, it has resonances in the regular daily life. And the body is sacred. The body is owned by your family and your parents. So you don't get tattoos. You certainly wouldn't donate your body or your brain afterwards. That's sacred. So getting people to donate their brains is very difficult. It's not like in the U.S. we have this overabundance of brains, but it's significantly more difficult to do this in East Asia. But the interesting thing that they're doing in China is targeting, kind of giving up on the older generation or focusing energy on the younger generation who are going to take a while to get their brains donated, hopefully. And they're working on social media campaigns and also have made it easy with different apps that they use to opt in to donating your brain. So it's interesting development. Yes?
Yeah, so I think we all understand the importance of the neuroethics. A lot of the issues you raise are really indeed important and interesting. But I think if those issues are not really directly related to us, to the researchers, scientists, people may not pay that much attention or support it more strongly. So I was wondering, what are the direct impact, or how is this going to directly affect us? For example, in the Brain Initiative, there's a neuroethics group. What is the mission? What are you trying to do so that actually scientists will be involved in this? I think that there needs to be some kind of a direct impact or effect or something like that. If you can give some examples,
Can you tell me what you mean by direct?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I know all these issues are important, but I'm busy with my work. So
direct impact would
yeah,
look like
so
what?
how would your work make a difference?
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
That's a really good question. And I think you asked two things. You're asking how can this be tangibly informative in some form that you recognize as direct? And also, are you actually involving scientists in this conversation? Because are you just having your head in the clouds and talking about this, right? So we don't do anything without scientists. All of the things that we're doing, have integrated scientists who inform our priorities and tell us which directions to go. Now, we haven't involved all scientists, but that's what we hope to get as many more involved. And that's kind of the next phase of this project, is we're going to be conducting engagement exercises with scientists and with the public to see which of these resonate, which of these we maybe want to throw out. So that's that question. So the scientists are intimately involved. How does it directly impact them? I mean, in one sense, neuroethics is involved in all stages of a project, from how you conceptualize what kind of research questions you can ask and what you think that we can answer through the brain, to how it's conducted, which is your typical, what you probably understand is more research ethics oriented, to the dissemination phases and how you communicate about that, and what kind of applications are rolled out into the public. So I think most people, when they ask me about direct, I asked you why, because people usually come from a perspective, are thinking about policy. So certainly we are involved with policy entities which are talking about frameworks and guidelines. But what we're more directly trying to do is just make it so a scientist is empowered to ask these questions throughout their work, so that they're able to communicate about the implications of their work, and they're capable to sit on groups to talk about how their work should be rolled out. And so some of this can involve how do I feel like my work might be used beyond my laboratory. Maybe I developed this for a brain disease, but actually that doesn't mean that someone else might not want to use it for a commercial domain for some sort of enhancement or something. Or might we develop some sort of fingerprinting that we use for this to identify disease in advance, and how is that going to intersect with insurance policies and things like that? So there's multiple domains and partners that we are engaging with. So that's generally kind of how we work. But is there something more specific you were thinking about? Does that help? Okay. you and then you, I think. I have to look at this side too.
So we didn't talk much about the issue of control. For example, you had that case study where a person's personality changed, or at least we're supposed to believe that. But what if somebody develops a modality where they can deliberately control a person's behavior remotely? Or if, say, for example, we want to enhance somebody's ability to work as a warrior, as you mentioned, or in a factory or something, how do you turn it off once they're done with work? So there are issues of control and issues how do you stop the enhancement once it's no longer necessary for the objective for which you created it? Because you don't want to have a super warrior released into the public if he gets PTSD, for example. So these are, real life issues that I think are also relevant.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So you're asking, can you talk a little bit more about how you handle ethical issues around control? Who controls? How do you control? To what extent do you control? And this relates to the question that I just received. And I'm glad you brought it up because it gives another illustration. So within projects, for instance, where stimulation is involved, for instance, now ethicists are working together in the lab, being aware of when, to what extent control can happen, to designing how control can happen. So for deep brain stimulation, for example, certainly there are models where the patient can have control of the stimulation, and there are models where they don't. And so ethicists will work with scientists to figure out how to assess what levels of control are going to be desirable and agreed upon between patients and their physicians and the scientist. How do you consent under that process? There are also groups that are working with DARPA, for instance, which are working on military context for that, and they have a neuroethics group which is helping them to evaluate that. And there's also, beyond the scientists and the ethicists, there's also policymakers in society and commercial entities that are working on how do you, we have another question related to that. So how do you get all the regulatory agencies involved to understand optimal ways to do that?
Yep. But you're assuming that everybody who wants to use that kind of technology has ethical standards, which is not the case.
Yeah. You say I'm assuming everyone has ethical standards. I don't know what you exactly mean by that, but I will say that if you're trying to imply some people are unethical or their priorities are at conflict with doing something that is maybe right for the user, sure, there are that. But what we're looking at is developing, before even looking at regulation, we're working to develop ethical leaders. So right now, for example, you asked about the Brain Initiatives group. We actually bring in some of the top scientists to come in and talk with us about what issues they foresee and how we might work towards them, and have professional groups talk about how they think that the best way forward is and how they're going to do that. So there's always going to be some people who don't care, and those are probably not going to be the people that we ultimately work with first.
Okay, so we have time probably for one more question, and then I just wanted to, again, to remind everybody that Karen's going to be available in room 389 from 2:30 to 3:30, so feel free to drop by with other questions. So, Peter, I think wait, we had one question, actually. Can we defer the one in the back? Wait, who has it? Who has a mic? You have a mic. Okay, go for it.
So, when you're asking these questions and you're involving scientists, I imagine scientists think very differently from non-scientific community, and their values are maybe different as well, advancing research versus kind of what maybe the general non-scientific public desires. Have you engaged the non-scientific community with these questions and seen major differences in the values placed on the questions you've asked?
That's a great question. Are there differences in the evaluation of these questions between publics and scientists? Actually, that is the study that we're trying to launch next, but we've done preliminary studies actually in Korea. And interestingly, and we did a little bit of kind of informal questioning while we were in China, and it seems like actually the scientists and the public have almost equal facility with asking these ethics questions, and their priorities aren't necessarily that different. But I think scientists think the public thinks differently than them, and I suspect the public also thinks the same thing. So I think that
we're going to try to squeeze in one
Okay.
last one really quick.
Okay, please.
Real quick, it's a bit two-pronged. So once you acknowledge, right, all of the cultural differences involved that inform the philosophy of neuroethics, what is the hope of your working group in the end? Are you hoping to find some sort of, smallest common denominator, or some sort of reconciliation between those views for the global collaborations? And the second prong is, all of this obviously exists in a landscape of economic and academic competition, right? And obviously, in some domains, having less regulation and easier access, at least in the short term, can give you an advantage to pull ahead of some other group. And I was wondering how your group is sort of dealing with that, which might be at odds with some of the more idealistic sort of pursuits.
Okay, that's an important question about neuroethics in general. I think about first you said, once we acknowledge all these different cultural views, what are we going to do? How are you going to reconcile these? And how do you do that in the landscape of different stakeholders having different priorities? For example, I think you're implicating private industry wanting to work on a faster scale, or not caring about economics more than academic. So first of all, I have to say that our neuroethics work group is a work group of the International Brain Initiative, and I didn't get to talk about this, but what we do is we work on short projects that we can complete in a year to 2 years. So our goal is a little bit different. The Neuroethics Working Group of the Brain Initiative does a lot of other things, like we do consulting for different scientists who ask us to do that, et cetera, and I can talk more about that later. But I don't anticipate that we're going to get a full laundry list of everybody's culture is like this. I actually think our goal is more humble than that, which is to just get people open to thinking about that. As far as how do you handle conflicting values, I mean, that's kind of our bread and butter in the space. What we do is we convene people, bring them together, and try to come up with shared solutions. And then we're not actually usually this is what happens way before the regulatory stage. And there will be disagreement, but we'll try to find most agreement. And we can talk about that more afterwards, because I was told not to go too far over.
Okay, well, thank you again, Karen, for joining us.
Thank you.